Joe, after 10,000 years, I'm free.
Ooh.
Or was it 3 months? I can't.
I mean, it was longer than the projected month that I said we would be taking off because I have a horrible, horrible concept of time, almost as bad as my sense of direction. I completely steered us in the wrong way here, and we end up going from the month off to about 3 and a week or so, depending on when this comes out.
Can't always be pod before life, as some folks can, and we salute the folks that can do that, but we have to take a break. Joe and I are getting a little bit older. Our bones are kind of brittle.
Mm-hmm. It's what it's like being in the late 30s. The elder millennials that we are, we do need to sleep from time to time. I've hit the stage where I am now, where I thought I would never be. That's when I would come home as a kid. We'd pop on a good movie, and then we'd watch it. And 5 minutes into it, I'd turn around, my parents would be sleeping. That's about where I am. I can make it like 20, make it longer. I don't have much left though.
We had our roaring 20s, and now we have our tired 30s. It's just how it works.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The pause after the plague is what I think is what you kind of do. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But as we usher in this era of change and our aging, we're also ushering in some changes to this little program of ours that we've been doing. And over the last couple of years, Joe and I have kept to a mostly weekly schedule when we're up and running, which we're actually going to adjust the dial just a little bit, a little tweaking. And so we'll actually be shifting this whole thing to a twice a week type of operation. The whole point of this, though, is that we've noticed a couple things, which is that we've seen more people begin to go to our YouTube page to watch things. We're making videos over there now, much more than we used to. And that's how people are moving, Joe. They're about the pictures, man.
They are. They want the moving pictures. None of this like static stuff. I mean, if we tried season 1 today, we'd be done. We'd be canceled. We're like, no, you're not allowed on the internet anymore. No one wants this. So that's the plan. And with the focus, and I think on YouTube content, is you're going to see that the podcast is, we're not going to say lose weight, but it's going to tighten it up. And we're going to probably keep the length of the conversation a little shorter than usual, but hopefully just as entertaining so that we can keep the YouTube crowd sticking around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the length won't be the same, but the girth will still be there. That's
very dense program. Very dense program.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Very meaty program, everybody. So, yes. But as this program has carried on, we tend to have some content that comes back to us every season that Joe and I, frankly, that's how the two of us met, dressed up in our Ghostbusters jumpsuits and realizing just how much you can sweat in those things.
A whole lot. Lot of sweat. A lot of room in that. And as we go from the meaty portion that is the new podcast, this is basically our bread and butter. When we start talking about the GBs and our continued, I guess, like I was gonna say love of the franchise. I mean, it ebbs and goes. It comes and lets itself in and out of the door. We allow it to hey, you can let yourself in or out, whatever you're doing.
I want to point out that I like ebbs and goes better than ebbs and flows, I think. Because seriously, sometimes things, they're in our peripheral, sometimes they're not. And I think that's what Ghostbusters is for a lot of people. It's one of those films that I think everybody kind of recognizes, like, oh yeah, I know that logo. I know the ghost trapped in the no symbol. Not everybody's watching this religiously.
No, and I don't know if it's because of almost maybe the nature of the media itself, because when you look at a lot of our our household names in media, like with Star Wars and Star Trek, and even like Doctor Who, like the intent was to have this longer ongoing story, whereas Ghostbusters, it was meant to be one movie. That's all they wrote, and that's kind of all they had planned for. And it kind of straddles this territory of successfully spinning off and taking a simple idea and being able to really run with it, to where some people may say they're stretching it a bit. And I think that's going to be the topic of our conversation of tonight. A big part of it tonight, or this morning, whenever you're listening to a podcast, because I'm old and think this is a radio program for some reason, is that, is this a franchise that, should it keep going? Is it ready to, stay in the grave? Or should it keep coming back because, Bustin' just makes everyone feel good?
Yes, this program is definitely like an old radio show brought to you by General Henry's Molasses. If it sticks to brick, it's Henry's. Yeah. I would say that the Ghostbusters franchise is definitely one of those. It's always living in pop culture. People are always thinking about it. Mm-hmm. But as you mentioned, Joe, are they stretching it out? And that is why you and I are going to be ranking some of these films and then asking some very serious questions at the end of this all. But believe it or not, there are 5 films within the Ghostbusters franchise. And Joe and I meticulously did not discuss ranking these films with each other beforehand. We want this to be just as fresh for you as it is for us.
Yes. So we can surprise each other all at the same time with our picks. Or maybe some won't surprise you at all. Who knows? They could be like, these old codgers, we know exactly what they're going to say. Yeah. We know where they're going to put these movies.
Well, okay. To that point, I was almost 100% sure, or 100% sure, if I'm saying that term the correct way, was that number 5 was not going to be a mystery to really any of us, which is, there is no way I can rank Ghostbusters Answer the Call, the 2016 film, any higher than bottom of the barrel number 5. And Joe, do you agree, yes or no?
Oh, absolutely. No. I will always hate this movie because what it tried doing to Ghostbusters 2, where it said, hey, remember all the bad things about Ghostbusters 2? That was a bad movie. You should like this movie. No, you should have to point out the flaws of other things to try and bring your movie up. Your movie was bad, and you should feel bad about it. Plain and simple.
I mean, the story behind Ghostbusters 2016, I think, is actually worse than the film itself, which is Paul Feig, who popularly directed Bridesmaids and a couple of other Melissa McCarthy films in the mid to early 2010s. This was one of those things where, like, you read the email pitch for this thing, and I look at it and I go, there are entry-level salespeople who can write a better email. And it was just a cobbled together string of ideas. And one of the things that I have always been very clear about with this movie is that it's not the fault of the people that were acting in it. Had nothing to do with their ability as actors. They were just trying to do what they could with the script they were given, and I can't really fault them for it, and I don't actually hate them for it either. Like,
no, and especially like when you say they could do what you could, I feel like that is literally what they did, because to my knowledge, most of this movie wasn't like heavily scripted. It was, here's a loose script, here's roughly what we want to happen, here's the scene, go. And that's what it felt like for most of this movie, is that you literally had them kind of, I don't want to say riffing off of each other, but building off of each other, trying to make a scene work. And it felt like it was just up to the director at the very end, and Feig just like is picking the scenes that he's enjoying the most to finally make the cut of the movie. And that's just like, you feel like that's wrong. Like, that's the exact opposite of what you should do. You should have a very well-written and laid out plan that allows for your actors to actually work with the material a little bit more, as opposed to, here's kind of what's going on, go. Not everything is whose line is it anyway. I'm not going to say that this was that in its purest and that it was basically all improv, because it wasn't. There was certainly some screenwriting and some scripting there somewhere. It's just very hard to find. So I think that, and one of the bigger things that also, I struggle with this because I feel like Sony's marketing to this movie also is kind of what killed it, is when it was just kind of a, if you don't like this movie, you're an asshole. And it's like, I'm an asshole, but like, I also hate this movie for different reasons. Yes. Completely different reasons.
Well, but when you say marketing the movie, though, they made a very big mistake with it, because they opened it up with, 30 years ago, 4 friends saved the world. And you're like, well, hold on. 3 scientists and 1 employee saved the world. Were they friends? I don't know. We don't know that work-life balance.
I mean, two of them seem like they're friends. The other there, not really. And then, along came a Winston.
And so therein lies the problem. People that were thinking this was going to be a continuation because suddenly you're making a callback about the original movie in the trailer, and they actually had to go back and change that. And so you're thinking, what are they trying to achieve here? And I still am not really quite sure after having watched it.
Positive.
So, yeah, it's not clear. I mean, the one thing I've said about this movie several times is that it feels like modern, like Will Ferrell style of comedy, where they were following an outline, but then they recorded probably like 40 or 50 one-liners per scene and went, yep, that one's the best one. Let's go with that one. And that's kind of how comedies have been built over the last like 15, 20 years. It's not always about what was the funniest that they wrote down. It's sometimes what they just came up with that day, and it didn't really work out in a Ghostbusters film.
No, and this is where, like, again, like Bill Murray worked so well when he like came up with something on the spot, and it's because he had a lot to work with, and he also, I guess, like, I think the people around him, it just worked well because he'd worked with them for like on several other projects where he was able to like actually make that performance come out. Whereas like with these girls, I know actually that should have been there. Some of that chemistry should have been there because I think at least two of them were in Bridesmaids together. Two of them are, I know they're SNL alumni. I don't know if they were on at the same time though. I bet more recent SNL I'm definitely foggy with who's on and who's off. But like parts of it should have worked, and I think it could have worked. Honestly, I'm going to say this with a different director, different writers. Probably could have made it work.
It could have worked, but the point was it didn't. There's a lot of things that it was kind of mired by. One, it doesn't really establish a whole lot of lore that really connects all that well. It's just a lot of multi-syllable words thrown out that, okay, that's something. Yep. And then when you look at the amount of money they put into this movie, which, I mean, it was ridiculous. It was almost like $120 million. And then you see that and you go, how did we end up with special effects like this?
Yeah.
With that amount of money spent? Not really adding up. I mean, I remember looking at that and thinking, and this is really not new territory, but a lot of people were like, this looks like the live action Scooby-Doo movies, but with a Ghostbusters filter.
Yep.
Like, how is that possible?
It was exactly my line of thought. And until they tried taking a mustache off of Superman, I didn't think it could get worse than that. So it's definitely one where it was just mired with problems. And I know we have, I think this movie is definitely the butt of most of our seasonal jokes, as we'll bring it up at least like 2 or 3 times a season to just be like, oh God, the taste is still in my mouth. I just can't get rid of it. But since I think everyone any regular listener of the show definitely saw that Answer the Call was going to be the one that we were both ready to hang up on, let's move on to where things probably diverge, and we go on to our 4th pick. So things get interesting here. And Mark, what's your number 4?
Number 4 pick for me, it unfortunately has to be the most recent, which is Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. For me, I will get into my reasoning for that, Joe, but what is your number 4?
My number 4, and this one was actually pretty hard for me, as in where I was going to have this, because I actually very much cherish this movie and will defend it the rest of my life. If people try to give me a crap, I'm going to put Ghostbusters 2 at number 4.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've already put this disclaimer at the beginning of the episode, but we'll put it here again. There will be spoilers for Frozen Empire if you haven't seen it yet. But interesting, Joe. I would like to hear your reasoning first for putting that number 4, and then I'll come over the top and hit you with this. And
this is where, like, Mark, honestly, it's going to be like a weird episode of Chopped, where you have the judges are having their food, and they're getting to the point where they're like, hey, you know what, dude, of the round, this is the best cooked octopus ever. I just got a little too much rice. And the guy's like, yeah, I can understand that. Portion was a little off, it's okay, because the other guy left an ingredient off the plate. And then the judges come back and they reveal the thing, and we just chopped the guy with the best, like, cooked octopus of the round, and we're like, really? Over a little bit of rice? And that's kind of what this is it feels like I literally put this at number 4 because of a little bit of rice. Looking at everything I loved about this movie, like the comedy is honestly, in some cases to me, better than the first movie. I think I actually quote this movie more than I ever do the first one, especially in terms of like Egon's. Like anything, like Egon is ridiculously quotable from this movie. The amount of times where I say I think people are more interested in my epididymis than anything else happens at least once a month. For a movie quote, that's pretty good. That's pretty solid. That whole like even opening bit where you've got not even opening bit, but you've got Egon running his own practice of like science and psychology and a little bit dabbling a little bit of everything. Everything in that scene is phenomenal. It's literally the thing that kills it for me is just that it does what a lot of sequels tend to do, and it tries to needlessly dial things back. It would have been nice to see that instead of they got sued by everyone and no one believes them, and basically New York hates them even though we ended on them saving the city. It would have been nice to, like, you know what? Things just kind of died down after we took out the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man to the point where we all had to find something else to do because the ghost dropped. We couldn't keep the lights on for that case because there just wasn't anything to do. So the stuff is sitting there just unused. And then our heroes could come together again, as opposed to we're broke, the city hates us, and then they patch that together at the end of the courtroom scene. I think they could have executed that better, and that would have made me put it higher up my list. So because of them basically doing the video game thing of like, you know what, we need a tutorial every single game because someone's probably jumping in halfway through this series. That's basically the reason why I knocked it down this far. It was something small, but that's where the other ones are for me. So, Mark, why put Frozen Empire on ice? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, here we go. Joe's doing the nightly news, one-liners there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Why did you put that high or that low? News at 11.
Mm-hmm. Back to you, Mark.
Well, hey. So for me, when I look at that movie, I actually laughed at Frozen Empire, I think, quite a bit more than I probably laughed at any other Ghostbusters movie. I mean, admittedly, there's a ton of funny one-liners in there, and it's not always reliant upon the main cast delivering it either. There are supporting people who are saying very funny things. But why it ranks so low for me is that there are some complaints about this movie with how there's way too many characters and there's way too many things to focus on within that runtime. Personally, I don't really care about that. The amount of characters that are in this movie kind of makes sense because you're introduced to some new concepts. There's like a research division of the Ghostbusters now that wasn't there before. You're building into what we're expecting would be, a continuation of more films from this point on. What really does it for me, though, or what I should say, what doesn't do it for me, was that there are some things in this movie that, frankly, I had to sit there and go, do I actually enjoy this? Mm-hmm. And I have to say, when it comes to a Ghostbusters film, now with the majority of this franchise, I enjoy what's happening. In this film, I enjoyed the majority of it, but there were some things like the concept of firebending, which, Joe, I've got to say, this ancient race of people who could bend fire... Sorry, this is not an Avatar movie. It was not something that I was expecting to see. I went in without any spoilers for this movie at all. I didn't know a damn thing about it. When I started to see that, I went, you know what, guys, I'm believing without question the majority of the ghost lore that you're building, like the whole ghost walk sequence, where Phoebe gets her soul removed from her body and they do that whole thing. Even that stuff I didn't really care for. Or I should say, I didn't mind, I should say. Mm-hmm. Even the pseudo, romance thing going on between Phoebe and the other ghost girl, that stuff we probably won't even get into at all. I didn't care. That was fine. Every time I think about that firebending part, I'm just like, I'm sorry, guys. I can't pretend that that belongs in a Ghostbusters movie. I just can't. It's not like we've seen people who could use any kind of power like that before, right? Like any time we've seen people who tried to talk about being psychics or anything like that to take from Ghostbusters 2, it's like even that was we're going to ground the science even though it shouldn't be the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where they kind of just whatever. We're just gonna let's just do what we're gonna do here, and it felt like they went a little too far. So because of that, it didn't at parts feel like a Ghostbusters movie. It felt like a weird, subculture of sci-fi that I just don't know has a place, and I think that's what's going to confuse people, and it's what has confused people at the box office. Like they're clearly not showing up for this thing, at least not in the numbers that you expect.
So what we're trying to say here is that Mark remembers exactly what happened the day the Fire Nation invaded, and he has not forgotten about it.
No. I mean, I gotta say, the horror and like the scary parts of that movie, they fucking worked, man. They absolutely worked. They nailed it. So I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad film, but that's why it's sitting at number 4 for me, dude. It's just too much uneven ground, and that's even with adding the fact that I think they used the old Ghostbusters extremely well in this film. I mean, there was not too much of anybody. I love the fact that they used Ray Stantz as a way of kind of representing the older audience that might be there, going like, you still got it a little bit, but you're not the spring chicken you used to be. So maybe, Joe, I was thinking a little bit about myself in that. But anyway, that's why it's my number 4. That's why it lives there.
Hey, that's all right. And now it is time to hit the podium, Mark. We hit the 3rd place finish. And in the interest of keeping basically the snake draft that we mostly always use in these ranking scenarios, what would you say is the 3rd best Ghostbuster movie?
Shouldn't be any surprise that Ghostbusters 2 would be my number 3. And some of the points you've made, I already agree with. We've obviously got a very funny movie that was pretty much force-fed to be made. I mean, Sony came back to the original guys and just like, we need more money. And they're like, we can't get Bill Murray to do this. And they're like, all right, well, let's you know what? Let's lie to him and let's see what happens. So, but for me, though, number 2 was fantastic because it did something that a lot of sequels don't do a good job of, which is building lore that fits. Like building lore that seems like, okay, we've got this river of slime. We're not going to get too crazy far into it, but we are going to explain how it's being used. And slime was already a big part of the first movie to begin with, right? It's ectoplasm, ghosts leave behind. So it would make sense that there's some properties to it and that there are things that it could be capable of, like negative and positive reinforcement. So as we talk about how the science of 4 doesn't quite carry and work for me, the science of 2 actually did. I thought it made sense, granted with the world they were building. So for me, 3 was one of those things that, I'll be honest with you, I went several years as a kid without having watched, and I always just thought that the Statue of Liberty being controlled by a Nintendo controller was like, just why is that in there? it was just in my head. Yeah, I'm like, where is this from? And then finally, like years later, I bought a VHS. That I'm like, oh my god, Ghostbusters 2 was a thing. And so, dude,
and for God's sakes, why didn't they pat her feet?
Yeah. I don't think they make Nikes in her size, Joe, but yeah, like that's the thing. It wasn't necessarily that it was a perfect movie, but what it did successfully was show me characters that I loved, that I enjoyed observing, and seeing what they do next, and seeing how they interact beyond just that first film. And so, if anything, that's what glued me to 2, was that here's the next story, here's the next chapter, this is what these guys behave like. And it felt like they understood them. They understood the characters, and nothing really was confusing to me.
Yeah, I mean, I can't find anything there, because like I said, it goes down to still as one of my by most like beloved and cherished movies is Ghostbusters 2. I will always look fondly back upon that movie. And again, that idea of trying to recapture lightning in a bottle, that was all that held it back for me. So when you bring up how well it builds lore, like it's 100% true that they do such a great job also following up a villain with a pretty decent villain and not having it feel like it's a carbon copy. That we didn't just have another demigod or something else in Gozer's place. We had something that, you know, functionality was similar because it's a ghost, or not a ghost, but it's able to control ghosts, but it does so for different reasons. Which brings us to my number 3, which is just, you know, continuing this whole idea of us swapping things, and my number 3 is the most recent film, Frozen Empire. And I think it's up there for some of the reasons you brought up, is that, you know, it was funny. It was fantastically funny. When we went, we were laughing a majority of the time that we were in that movie, all the while it is building lore on top of what it's going. Do we agree with the lore? Did they maybe try and pack too much lore into it and try doing too many things? I agree with you that is completely up for debate. And if it feels like you're being given this, you know, all you can watch buffet, and that's maybe too much for us to consume, I'm not going to argue that point. But what I'm going to say is that what we do get that is good supersedes that in a way, because this is like what you said earlier with your review of part of this movie that you liked. It is, I think, the first Ghostbusters movie where stuff was legitimately kind of scary. Where I think that, especially a few times, like, well, not a few times, but like afterwards, you looked at me and said, "Hey, man, I don't think I could bring my kids to this movie." Because of it would be scary. You see the parts where our new big bad is like reaching out to try and touch things, and it looks terrifying. You literally get moments where you think things are going to go wrong enough to the point where you don't think the movie is going to end with like the villain winning. But, you know, there could be a point where maybe we don't walk away with all of our Ghostbusters for one reason or another. So I think because it does that better than anything else in the franchise, and something that we hadn't seen before, that kind of alone just kind of like advances the franchise to a level that none of the movies had tried before, because all of them were kind of meant to be in some way, at least, or like the original was meant to be kind of this darker comedy where it was like drier delivery. It was not meant to be like the uproarious like slapstick stuff that you'd been getting in the 80s and 70s. It was funny but subtly, whereas this one was like, no, like there was just enough modern humor along with like that humor that would keep those who saw this movie in the original movie in the 80s, or saw the original movies in the 90s when they're old enough to watch and remember them, to actually enjoy all of it. And I think that when you have a great combination of the original cast coming back and really well casted new cast members from Afterlife all coming back to this movie, and well, like, would have been nice to see more of Paul Rudd and Callie. Why am I forgetting her last name? Or is Callie her last name?
Oh, Carrie Coon.
Carrie Coon. There you go. I'm sorry, I had the wrong C. So it would have been nice to see more of those two, because we kind of see them dealing with like, well, they're definitely a thing now, and if they want to stay a thing, they actually kind of have to work together as parents, and that's kind of all we really get to explore with them. Would have been nice to see more, at least more of that, as opposed to what felt like snippets of it. But because like everything was funny, like, and I was like, it wasn't like wall-to-wall laughs, but most of it was funny. You have really good effects throughout the whole movie, and this idea that you're actually scared in a Ghostbusters movie at points, all of it elevates it and puts it number 3 for me.
I gotta say though, the reason why I dropped it was because of the fact that some of those tropes, those family tropes, man, they just felt like this was standard for most 80s and early 90s movies. This whole mixed family dynamic, and then the events of the film lead them to bond in the end. And it's like that's been beaten into the ground. You know, you're trying so many other things here. Try something else, right? Do something else. Find a different way to bond these characters. And sorry, I just had to get that one in there.
Nah, it's all good. And that's why this one was second to number 2, but now we need the true 2s, sir. So, what is your second pick for the franchise? Or are we snaking this and I get to go?
I was going to say, if you want to, go ahead. You can snake it, man. I don't care.
Okay.
Feel free.
I mean, I'm just getting used to podcasting again, and I almost went against what I had said earlier. So I'm just spitballing here, man. Here we go. So my number 2 pick is going to be Ghostbusters Afterlife. It is going to be the second one for me. So we will get into ranking here in just a little bit, and as to why that's my number 2. But go ahead, Mark. What's your number 2?
I'm fully prepared to take flack for this. I'm actually going to put the original Ghostbusters at number 2.
There's a hot take, ladies and gentlemen. There we go.
I am fully prepared to defend that pick. For one, Joe, I've seen that film easily 150, 200. I don't even want to think about how many times I've watched Ghostbusters, the original movie. But tell you what, how about we let you start with Afterlife, and then I will explain myself.
So basically the only reason, and I mean the only reason this movie is second and not first, is because, and this is going to sound like contrived and stupid, the movie wouldn't work without the first one. And you can say, well, no sequel works without the first one, dummy. No one puts Ghostbusters 2 first in production and then puts Ghostbusters 1 out there in the story. And I say, sir, have you ever heard of A New Hope? Boom. We started with 6 there and went back to 1, and we saw how well that worked. But I digress. My point is that while this movie, I feel storytelling-wise, does everything right, as in we get great new cast members, we get a nice little bit of nostalgia when we get the original cast members coming back in towards the end of the movie, or Annie Potts is in actually relatively early in the movie, and I do not want to downplay her role in any Ghostbusters movie because the franchise doesn't work without Janine Melnitz. It just doesn't. So I don't ever want to say like, oh, well, she's in there earlier, but you say I digress. She's fantastic, never to be understated. But the reason why it doesn't work is even though the movie does really play on, it stays with the new cast majority of the movie, and the new cast figuring out that family dynamic, moving to a new town because they're broke. That is very well done, and that's where the movie lives. There is so much use of the original score. You've got Gozer coming back in this movie. Those things, without those elements basically existing as we know these things and we're familiar with them, and of course, without the Harold Ramis, Egon Spengler depiction at the end, those are some of the best parts of this movie, where if you introduce them fresh in this movie, they don't work. I just think had we started with this movie and kind of go back like you would have done with The New Hope, where, yes, I fought with your father in the Clone Wars. And you're like, oh, the Clone Wars, tell me more, sir, as I look down at my lightsaber. Yes, I think if we had started this franchise with Afterlife and then maybe built backwards to the original Ghostbusters, I don't know if it would have worked as well. Is that this movie succeeds because of how well the first Ghostbusters movie worked when it came out and how much we all loved the original Ghostbusters movie. And that is me being a dick about it because everything is great about it. Like, McKenna Grace is the star of that movie for very good reason. She makes the scene every time she's in it. Her character is the driving force behind what's going on in the movie, and she nails it. She just crushes that movie. So I do not want to make it seem like I'm downplaying any of the new cast members and what they're doing, but I think the movie works to the level that it does because we had such a great Ghostbusters 1 movie.
I'm not going to disagree with you a ton there, but what I will say is that obviously we know what our 1 and 2 picks are now, so the mystery's gone. However, for me, what it ended up doing, Joe, was that I thought about how old I was when I watched both movies. And when I watched the first movie, that was my jam when I was a little kid. Mm-hmm. And over time, I kind of grew out of that. Like, I grew out of it. I lost my love with it as much as I had back then. And as I watched Afterlife, I began to realize, like, yeah, the fan that I am now bonds more with the concept of this afterlife story where you have a struggling family and you're trying to discover yourself. And because, man, to be honest with you, finding who you are is not just a teenage journey. It goes a lot further than that. And so for me, it was a concept of, okay, Ghostbusters 1 was my number one movie when I was younger. Afterlife, I bond much more with what's going on here because you're trying to rediscover some of the past that maybe you didn't know about. People do that all the time with their own genealogy. It's not just when someone suddenly dies, you know. And so for me, that's what I was really going through. Because you and I saw Afterlife in theaters together as well. It is the only Ghostbusters movie where I shed tears. And Joe, I loved Ghostbusters 1. I mean, I was glued to that movie as a kid, and I had a cardboard box with like a paper towel roll. I mean, trust me, it resonated with me. But when I got to Afterlife, okay, and you see the end, and Phoebe's trying to control the neutrino wand, which that's what it's actually called, fans of this movie. She's controlling this, obviously losing it. She's about to get her face melted, you know, by Gozer, and suddenly Grandpa Egon steadies that thing, and I just was like, don't let him see. Don't let him see. Cry. Hide in the popcorn bucket. Hide in the bucket. And I can't think of many other movies, Joe, that caused me to feel such a thing. I mean, good God. Every time I saw that film for probably the next like 5 or 6 viewings, my kids were just as glued to it as I was in the theater. And if anything, that's what it reminds me of, like the fact that it could make me feel that way and make my kids feel the way that I did when I saw the first one. Like, I get what you understand, or I get what you're trying to say when you, like, one supersedes the other, one's influenced by the other. Totally get that. But when it comes to a sequel, being able to elicit a response like that far removed from the original, Joe, how many other times have you been able to say that about another franchise?
They've made me cry, but for vastly different reasons, Mark. And I think we should make sure we know that. Because, yes, I've definitely, movies have moved me in different ways, but typically they move me away from the movie. And which is why I'm not going to fight you on that being your number one. I'm just not, because even going this honestly, I really thought what was going to happen is that here we're basically we're going to flop 2 and Frozen Empire, and that's all. We're both going to have 2016 at the bottom, and then we're going to line up with 2 and 1. And I'm actually very happy that didn't happen. Because when you are looking at this idea, like how it's influential in life, and you're finding yourself at different point in times, I just look at movies that make you who you are. Like, we always have like a video games who made us, but like Ghostbusters was that movie for me. Like, basically, I don't even say just as a child, because it definitely was. Like, there are definitely pictures of me dressed up as a Ghostbuster. I had proton packs, I had toys. I always wanted to be a Ghostbuster. If there was a way for me to have been that when I was growing up, if it was an actual job, I would have done it in a heartbeat. So, like, that movie, followed by the cartoon, and followed by a second movie, just kept me going, like, through my childhood and even into, like, my teenage years. Like, that was the movie that when things were crap, I put Ghostbusters on, and things were better. If I was having a bad day because of either work, school, relationships, I felt sick. As soon as I was done watching The Price is Right, Ghostbusters went on, because that was part of the way to feel better, along with Sprite for some reason, or 7-Up. My family seemed to think that 7-Up makes you feel better when you're sick.
And Chicken Noodle. The two together. Noodle soup. That
one makes sense. That one works. 7-Up, can't have it to this day. That's really due to sickness. Everything else in that scenario works. While I can say that maybe Ghostbusters has fallen down for me a little bit, because I feel like part of my love for that movie has been kind of diminished by by other things in my life, and I think I just enjoy I enjoy different movies more now. The fact that it was able to basically have that hold on me for so long, to me, is like it takes an incredible movie for you to be able to watch it when you're a kid, watch it when you're a teenager, and go back and watch it as an adult and be like, man, I was a dumb fucking kid for liking this. Like, that happens with so many things, and it just didn't happen with Ghostbusters ever.
Mm-hmm. I can't really disagree with you either. I mean, we knew Homerism was going to make its way into this episode, this kickoff of our fourth season. We all knew that was going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
But one question we've got to return to that we started this whole thing off with. Now, Joe, I want to applaud you. You did the stretch motion and not the spread motion. Very important for those watching the video. As we get to this point in the Ghostbusters franchise, does this need to continue from here? Have we seen enough? I mean, Joe, I would love to give my thoughts, but I'll let you do yours first.
Had you asked me this question in 2016, I would have said we could leave it. We're good. We could stop here. We don't need much more. And that's just because, like, you kind of always get afraid of, like, you get something as a bad taste in your mouth. And it while it will never, like, any negative opinions I have of that movie, which are clearly because it's a piece of art, it's subjective, I can hate it, you can love it, and that shouldn't diminish you loving it. That movie never took away, for that same reason, never took away my love of the original movie. But some things I feel like just work better than others when you try breaking them go. Like, I love the real Ghostbusters, I love Extreme Ghostbusters. Kind of sad didn't get a second season. It's just one of those things where, like, if you have the right people attached to it, I would love to see more of it. So, like, with Extreme Ghostbusters work, because you had Egon Spengler in it, and he was voiced by Maurice LaManche, who voiced him in the original, and it worked really well. And I feel like one of the reasons that you had Afterlife and Frozen Empire work for me is because you did have the involvement of so much of the original cast replaying the characters they were from the movie I loved, and they weren't just odd throwaway cameos. And for that reason, as long as you can involve them in a way that makes sense, I think those movies will find audiences, so long as you continue to develop lore and find things that work. So when you take something like Frozen Empire, and it does seem to cast a wide net with a lot of cast members, and they try new things, maybe that's them putting out things that work and things that don't work, and where to go from there. But then also the worry is, again, the old cast members are getting old. There's only so many more things they can be involved in. Aykroyd will do anything he can with this franchise until he literally can't move anymore, because that's how much he loves it. And you always want to make sure that you keep that fresh and able to work, and you don't enter a Red Sky era. If you catch my drift. Oh, yeah. And so because of that, I feel like we haven't hit the Red Sky yet. And that we aren't grasping at straws to keep the franchise going. However, I mean, I don't ever say with modern things, because I don't feel like critically this movie critically, the most recent one, didn't do well, but I also just start to feel like, the older brother to He-Man party and think that my dad says those guys are full of shit. So I think as long as you can keep the old cast realistically involved and expand on the story of the newer cast and have them involved kind of more to the same level that they were in the first movie than they were in the second, I think this franchise has legs to run. But what about you?
And I have to disagree with you there, because I think the legs are nubs at this point. I really do. I mean, the lore of the series has been great. They were able to expand it with Frozen Empire, and I applaud them for that. It was really cool what they ended up doing there, because it was different. It was something that the rest of the franchise hadn't seen just yet, or at least not from the non-animated series, right? But personally, I had doubt about this movie. Like, as I watched it, like I told you, Joe, most of the time when it comes to a Ghostbusters movie, I'm not sitting there like, tilting my head like this going, what? Wait, what was that? typically I can get through a Ghostbusters movie and frankly, my eyes are drying out because my lids aren't blinking, like I'm into it. So when Aykroyd first started doing press tours for 2016 and even a little bit for Afterlife, he was passing around this idea of making the Ghostbusters into an MCU style of franchise. As soon as he said that, I went, I can't get behind that. I just don't understand how you could do this. Like, this isn't like House Hunters, okay? I don't care about international. I don't care what's going on with those properties. I don't care how you could expand it beyond that. It's not something I want to see. And even the original characters, man, I might get dogged for this too. Seemingly everybody wanted to be Venkman growing up. I wanted to be Stantz. I wanted to be Ray Stantz the whole time. I wanted to be sitting there like looking up stuff in a book and going, holy shit, that's really cool. And not being the guy that got the girl in the end, right? Like, that didn't matter to me. I was all about being the field guy. Like, give me some of that rich text. I want to read it. and so that's what really sucked me in. Like, I kind of saw Stantz as like a proxy to my dad who was in the military, because my dad was kind of a bookworm, but he had that enthusiasm that, that Ray Stantz has. And to see him have those last kind of flickers of that in Frozen Empire, I saw everything I needed to see. Like, I got to see him struggling with, like, what happens when you get that old. And he still is able to kind of figure it out for himself. Not really much more redemption to give those characters anymore. I just don't see it. So, it was a tough truth to come to, man. But after I saw that movie, I was like, I really do think we're done here. I don't know what else we need to do. I mean, I'm sorry. I lost.
No, I agree with you. Like, as much as I think that they can go forward with this if they do it well and they do it right, I can agree with you. Like, you know what? Afterlife was a completely fine spot to end the story. We got to see that the torch is being passed to a group of new Ghostbusters that I think we all enjoyed. We got to see all of our old Ghostbusters kind of go out in one last job, taking out the same demigod that kind of put them on the map. So I agree with you, and I also at the same time agree that there is no room this franchise for a Marvel Universe MCU, because I think we're even finding out that we're kind of running out of room for the MCU.
Yeah.
And on that bombshell, it's time to end the show.
Exactly. It has been quite a long time since we've done a send-off, Joe. But as always, we do want to thank you for listening to Digital Dissection if you found your way back. We appreciate everything the Dissection crew does for us week after week. And not just while the podcast is active, as we've mentioned. We are much more active on YouTube these days, putting out videos week over week. But your support does go a long way no matter how you find us. And if you happen upon this show by accident, why not drop us a review or comment on the show?
Yeah, and because it's been a while, we don't want you to forget that we actually enjoy hearing from you. So if you want to keep interacting with the podcast, please become a member of our Dissection crew. Do not be afraid to comment, subscribe, heck, sort of like a review, maybe, and just maybe, email us. I know, kind of a dead medium, basically used for those of us who are just on LinkedIn, but if you throw us a line at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com, we'll respond back. We're basically just doing this and our jobs. Some of us are parents, some of us coach, some of us do things. We'll get to you relatively soon. And until next time, keep on dissecting.